right, good Monday morning. It is October 3rd. Holy smokes, where has the time gone? We are now 36 days out from the election. So much to get to. 5 things we want to talk about today. Number 1, Hurricane Ian. And number 2, Biden's gaffes. Number 3, border czar Kamala Harris. 4, the Supreme Court. Their session starts today. And then 5, a little media roundup. All right, let's get into it. I know for so many people, we knew somebody who was impacted. I've got my mother's got a place down in Fort Myers. Obviously, or luckily, she was not there. The death toll now in Florida statewide is at 76. They expect that number to grow. 1.6 million people are still without power. I know, at least according to my mom, some of the Fort Myers area has been restored. That Sanibel Island, that bridge that goes over it, I can't imagine what's going to happen there. I mean, think about the idea. I mean, there was a bridge that got you right over. That bridge is gone and washed out. I have no idea what it takes these days in terms of permitting and timeline and everything else and funding to get a new bridge. So I mean, maybe they'll do some kind of ferry service. But even that's just not, that's not something you just do overnight. Anyway, I'm going to get to a little bit in the media section, but I will say this. I think so far I would give both Biden and the DeSantis team pretty high marks. I think the federal government's done a good job. The DeSantis team and my friend, buddy, and friend of the show who's come on quite a bit, Jimmy Patronis, the CFO of Florida. Interestingly enough, I didn't realize this. The CFO is sort of the chief financial officer, but it's like the state treasurer in a lot of states. He also is the state fire marshal, and he oversees all the emergency. So at first I saw him in these press conferences, and I thought, maybe DeSantis tapped him. He really is doing an amazing job leading this effort on the real, like obviously the governor's the head of the state, but Jimmy Patronis is the guy directing so many of these emergency teams. And I will say this, like, look, we are still 5 days out. There's a lot of, we go in probably phases in terms of natural disasters. There's the preparation, there's the actual event itself, there's the immediate follow-up, and there's the long term. And I think so far we're in, phase 3. We obviously had the preparation. I think with the exception of some county officials, pretty good warnings to get out and evacuate, coordination with FEMA and the federal government ahead. During the event, I think they executed very well in terms of where assets were, et cetera. And then in the immediate aftermath, there's just something I was looking at social media where this guy was like, there's a gas truck coming, and he was like, I'm a Democrat, but I'm voting for DeSantis. And this isn't about politics per se. It's about people look at leaders who do their job and frankly reward them. So I've got some more to touch on in the media section, but obviously they're saying this is probably the 5th worst hurricane that's ever. And if you think about the destruction, right? It went all across. It was technically a Category 4, but it was like 1 or 2 miles per hour from becoming a Cat 5. And the images that I've seen in the news and then on social media of just places getting destroyed is mind-boggling. So continue to keep an eye out and pray and hope that the people of that area down in Florida, and obviously it touched on South Carolina, little into Georgia, a little into North Carolina, but hopefully all of those people can rebuild. I think there's a much bigger conversation to be had, to be honest with you, about, when you're rebuilding, what are we rebuilding? What are we paying for? Because, there's just, if you look back through history, there's going to be another hurricane. It's just a question of this one was 100 years from the last one, so maybe it's 50, maybe it's another 100. But I think there should be a conversation about what we rebuild and where and how, so that we don't set ourselves up for failure and everyone have to bail it out. There's a argument that, people should get their money back, if you will, in terms of the insurance claims. But then there's a bigger question if how we rebuild. But that's for another time. Obviously, it was interesting last week. Biden had this huge gaffe. This is story number 2 for those of you keeping track out of the 5. And he literally, he's had a ton of them. Number 1, this one was particularly interesting for a variety of reasons, and I'll get into it. But just so we're clear, there was an event at the White House for this school. For this feeding Americans and the efforts. And so the bill sponsors were there, one House, one Senate. both the Republican, lead Democrat on both sides. Anywho, so Biden starts calling out for Jackie Wolorski, who is an Indiana congresswoman about a month and a half ago, killed tragically in a car accident with two other staffers. We talked about it on this podcast because I didn't know either of the staffers, but I sort of related to the circumstances. Anyway, so when she died, he'd put out a statement reacting to it and obviously expressing concern and thoughts and prayers to his family, et cetera, et cetera. The event had a video where she was being, like a tribute video, a legacy to her legacy and to her work. Okay. I say all this because then he says, "Where's Jackie? Where's Jackie? Jackie, get up here. Jackie, is she here? Jackie's here." She's not there because she passed away tragically a month and a half ago. And I was wondering at the time, like, oh gosh, the press is definitely going to try to cover this one up. Now, first of all, just to give you an understanding of what happened, whenever the White House does an event, there's what they call a pool event. Okay, so a representative group of people go into every event, but it's like 10. So you've got what they call a print pooler, which is someone from the print newspapers. There's a wire reporter, so AP, think AP, Reuters, Dow Jones Wire, I can't remember who else is in it. And there's a TV pooler, right? So ABC, NBC, Fox, Newsmax, and then there's a radio one, and there's a photography one. And those people, because they'll travel everywhere, and it rotates. It rotates the organization, and then within the organization. So if it's Newsmax's day, that our news people choose which person, that the White House correspondent that will represent, Newsmax. So it could be, John Gizzi, it could be James Rosen, whatever. But Newsmax has, let's say, once out of every 10 days. I don't even know. I'm making that up, but I'm just giving you an idea that the pool, one of the jobs of the print pooler is because, think about it, like whether it's Air Force One or a small event in the Oval Office or whatever, all sort of different places in the White House. They can't fit everyone. So they create this pool, and everyone kind of buys into the idea that they go in, they represent their piece of the media, the TV, the radio, the print, whatever, and then kind of create a report that all of the press can use that's part of the pool. And so you join the White House pool, and with it come responsibilities like that you'll be, in the rotation. Any case, the pool report comes out to describe what happened at the event, and it makes no mention of this. None. It pretends like it didn't happen, which is immediately suspect because you're like, why wouldn't you do that? But what happened afterwards was the White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, goes out and she gets asked about it by Cecilia Vega of ABC. Now, again, these are folks who generally try to help the White House, who are no friend to the right. And she starts going off about top of mind. She was top of mind to the president. And when you're top of mind, it was like Kamala Harris wrote her comments or something. It was completely weird. And then it starts becoming like the View asset. I put out this tweet. I said, after an ABC reporter, Cecilia Vega that I just mentioned, the very network that the View is on, asked press secretary about Biden where a member of Congress who passed away is, and then followed up by a political reporter. Joy Behar started blaming the right wing, saying that it's all of our fault. And then, by the way, she goes on to say that, lots of people have senior moments or mommy moments. Is Sarah Haynes the other? But it was almost unbelievable. And the thing that I found fascinating was when Trump was walking down this wet ramp towards the end of his term, he grabbed the railing, and there was this whole thing about how he was walking, and that must show signs of degenerative and cognitive decline. It was insane that walking down a wet road. Think about it. The other day I was taking my son to Washington Nationals game, and it was all wet, and literally that slick floor. I was kind of keeping an eye on just walking through the park because. One part they had, the water had kind of gone through, and there were like these little puddles. Anyway, I noticed that it was really slippery, and I even said to him and his friend, I said, just be careful, it's slippery, and I was walking a little bit more cautious. Anyway, but there was literally the Media Research Center did this analysis of 50 minutes of coverage. And it was with doctors, is he okay? What's happening? Biden literally is calling up for a dead woman moments after a tribute video to that woman, a woman that he put out a statement recognizing her passing and the tragedy that occurred in this accident. And then over the weekend, Chuck Todd's we all have these moments. I'm like, no, don't do that. And then the idea that the White House press secretary just continues to talk about how it was top of mind and we all have top of mind. It literally, you can't make this stuff up. So anyway, story 3, border czar Kamala Harris. She went to the border, folks, just not our border. She has been the border czar for almost 2 years and not been to the border, right? But she visited the DMZ. She went and looked at the border of South Korea, North Korea, and she's got all these photo ops, and I'm thinking, okay, but your job, that was on the way home from the funeral of Shinzo Abe over in Japan. So it's like a stopover, and you still have time to visit, but you claim that you don't have time to visit our border? I just, at some point, it's give me a break. Let's cut it out, right? We all know that you don't want to do it. You don't want to see it because you'll know what's going to happen. You have to admit that you're not doing your job. There's a problem. I had the president of Guatemala, I've made this point before, but he was back on the show a little while ago, right? And he's that's one of the countries that's a problem, and they haven't spoken in a year, and he's been here in the U.S. a couple times. But this is at some point we're we're all being lied to is what it comes down to, and everybody almost seems in the media that they're just ignoring that they're ignoring the problem. It does kind of intrigue me that this is how this is being handled. So the fourth big thing right now is the Supreme Court. It starts its new session today. And here's the thing. There are at least 5 cases that are going to be big. And it's interesting because Roe v. Wade was obviously the big one that everybody focused on last fall. Ketanji Brown Jackson actually starts today. I think it's the first day that she had this ceremony yesterday. But anyway, so we've got a new court, and there's a couple cases. So I'll run through them quickly because they're really impactful. The Sackett v. EPA, the arguments are today. Okay, and this is about whether or not the EPA regulatory reach extends to the wetlands that are not connected to federal waters above ground. Okay, that's, eyes are glazing over right now. But that's not what the case is really about. It really comes down to how much reach can a federal agency without given the legal authority from Congress to do something. So in other words, what this is really going to come down to is, can an agency that hasn't been empowered by law, i.e. the Congress has passed a law and the president signed it, go out on its own and do this authoritative action on behalf of government, which, if you think about it, so at its core, this is not about wetlands, which is what, if you're reading, you're like, oh my God, I'm bored out of my mind. Maybe not. Maybe you've got a couple really environmental conscious people that are listening. But the bigger point is that this is going to come down to the role and sort of stretch of government. And so that's going to be fascinating. The one that's going to be a really big case that's watched, and this one, the arguments aren't until October 31st, but that's coming up, is this affirmative action case on students that were denied admission to Harvard, and I believe the University of North Carolina is brought into it, which, by the way, is a totally interesting thing because Ketanji Brown Jackson said that she would not hear this case because she had been involved with Harvard, but now they've combined it with UNC. I will be interested to see if that gives her the reason why she says she can now do it. Just keep an eye on that one, though. Trust me on that. This is basically asking the justices to end affirmative action, which currently permits admissions to consider race as a factor, right? But you've got these Asian students saying that this is unfair to them. Third case is an election law one. It's Moore versus Harper. I don't think it's been put on the docket yet. But this is going to be a really interesting thing because folks on the right have really clawed onto this. This is about whether or not state legislatures have power over how voting maps are drawn in federal elections. there is a clause in the Constitution that basically folks on the right have hung their hat on. It says, look, it says that we get to do this. And why that matters is because all of these state judges have overruled state legislatures in states throughout the country. I mean, Ohio was a big one, where Republicans thought they were going to use their majorities to really gerrymander, to make districts that they wanted, that put more Republicans in charge. And the courts came in and intervened on a state level. And a lot of these, I think North Carolina was another one. Florida, the court got involved. But the bottom line is these folks are basically saying to the Supreme Court, hey, look, the way that we interpret the Constitution is such that it's state legislatures that are completely in charge. This would be huge, at least in the short term, for Republicans, because it would basically take state courts out and say, hey, if they pass it, and the governor signs it, or whatever that state procedure is, it's a done deal. So that's going to be a big one. The voting rights bill, voting rights case is called Merrill versus Mulligan. They expect our arguments tomorrow. This is about alleged racial gerrymandering, and so this is this one is a little intriguing because it goes back to the Voting Rights Act and whether or not you can pack minorities into a district, or if you can. So the idea is, so there's these majority minority districts, right? Because they packed all of black voters into a district and whatever. They're basically challenging this. And so this will be interesting, and this is where you're going to see a lot of outrage on the right. On the left. You're going to see a ton of outrage. So I would keep an eye on that. There is an LGBTQ case. This is I'm going to be interested to see. It's 303 Creative versus Ellenis. It's not scheduled, not docketed yet, but it's a Colorado website designer who refused to make her services available for same-sex weddings. I'm not the biggest court watcher or legal experts, but I don't know why that's that different than the one about the baking the cake. But trust me, we are going to break all of these down on Spicer & Company. I've got some great legal experts that come on, between Alan Dershowitz, Mike Davis of the Article 3 Project, Carrie Severino. So we will, we're going to, if you watch the show, you're going to know these cases. But those are the 5 big ones. And I think the left is freaking out because for the first time in, you've got a conservative majority. And so they're sort of, they look at all this as a huge challenge to a lot of the liberal orthodoxy that the court has either upheld, or because even the Republicans, you think about it, and Roberts is somewhat, and probably not as far, but you think about it, a lot of these Republicans that were appointed by Bush and Reagan that ended up being, quote, swing votes. They like, their view is the Republicans are always great to be on these, cases when they're the swing vote, or they're the squishy Republican. But now that you've got these real conservatives, Alito, Kavanaugh, Coney Barrett, Gorsuch, it scares the heck out of these guys. That's the reality. So, I just say that because it's interesting that they had no problem with the court back when it benefited them. Anyway, real quickly on the media, it was interesting. SNL came back for its first season Saturday night, and I have it on DVR. I ever had since the White House. But anyway, so they open up, and I was actually intrigued. I'm like, what are they going to open up the season with? What are they going to open up this week with after the Jackie Wolorski stuff, after KGB? It's like been gaff, right? So what do they open with? They open with Trump. It was unbelievable, and at one point they kind of joked about the fact that they were open, that they were over sort of missing all of these Biden stories. But that's how bad it is that they literally open with Trump. And I don't know. I couldn't help myself but laugh. So that just tells you how bad it is. And then again, you've got Chuck Todd the next morning on NBC. I mentioned this a minute ago when he's bringing up, he asked Simone Sanders, who had formerly worked for President Biden, then candidate Biden, And then for VP Harris, she now has a show on MSNBC. He asked her about both the Biden gaffe and KGP, and they're like, oh, well, this is, everybody has their their slip of the tongue. And I'm like, whoa, this isn't slip of the tongue. Anyway, two more quick things to get to, or three more things that I just wanted to note. There's a story in the New York Times today by Nate Cohen, who's their chief political analyst, which is the person that's like being the weatherman. I mean, over at the New York Times, they constantly get stuff wrong. And it says it's time to take the Democratic chances in the House seriously. No, it's not. Okay, here's the deal. I don't, just on redistricting alone, Republicans picked up 2 seats in Texas, probably 2 to 3 seats in Florida, definitely 1 in Ohio. And this is like off the back of the envelope math. Right, the bottom line is that they may not have a big majority, but like I brought this up before. This is voter suppression. Like they are not going to win. Okay, not. In fact, I actually think they end up with a pretty decent majority, but that's for another podcast. And believe me, we've got plenty of time because we're getting closer and closer, as I mentioned, 36 days out. But this is a joke. These guys at the New York Times got it wrong over and over and over again, number one. Number two, this is frankly voter suppression. It's trying to tell the Republicans, oh, don't worry, these guys have, there's a good chance. I mean, no, they don't have a chance. No chance at all. Then there was a story in Politico about how weak rural turnout could hurt GOP in November. And they're basing this off of some special elections that occurred in August. Ridiculous. Special elections are special, okay? Number one. Number two is you can't look at turnout in the middle of August when people are on vacation and claim that that's the same after having been inundated with a bunch of national and in voting season when people like in November, early November or late October. I mean, so these guys are literally doing backflips. The last thing I do want to touch on is going back to Hurricane Ian for a second. It has been amazing to watch how, whether it's the print, whether it's CNN or MSNBC, these folks are using this tragedy, and that's what it is, a tragedy, to really push this narrative of climate change being responsible. And even the guy from NOAA, the National Oceanic Administration, these were like, when Don Lemon was going after him, he's like, look, this is not only the time, this is not how... So he was like, this is not the time to talk about climate change. And then when Lemon pressed him, he said, no one single event can be caught. I mean, like, they literally, these are the scientists, the experts. I mean, I'm sorry, Ali Velshi from MSNBC or Don Lemon. You are not scientists. This is not your wheelhouse. The idea that these guys are pontificating as if they have a clue is insane. But this is the stuff that we're continuing to deal with. Anyway, excited for another great conversation this Thursday as we get closer and closer to Election Day. Please continue to make sure that you sign up, subscribe, review. And by the way, I'll do this again, I think, this weekend. Little giveaway. Keep an eye on the Instagram stories. If you're an Instagrammer, follow me. I've been kind of going through stuff. I've got a lot of great political swag. And for people who are taking the time to go out there and help support the podcast, I got a lot of stuff to give away. Anyway, I'll see you back here Thursday. Thanks for tuning in, and I will catch you later.